Oh, this is a recorded session. My apologies. So the way this works is I'll be putting Peter and Brian into the Zoom translation room. When I do that, there will be a globe icon that shows up on your Zoom your Zoom toolbar. Please, everyone, go in that globe and choose your language that you would wish to hear this session in, English or French. Also choose mute original audio. Go
Donc,
ahead, Peter.
pour répéter en français, un service d'interprétation simultanée est offert dans les 2 langues pour les séances d'aujourd'hui. Si vous voulez écouter l'interprétation en français, dans quelques instants, vous allez voir apparaître une icône en forme de globe au bas de l'écran avec l'indication interprétation, interpretation, et vous n'avez qu'à cliquer dessus et choisir le français. Vous pouvez aussi choisir Mute Original Audio pour taire l'anglais, sinon vous allez l'entendre en sourdine. Si vous éprouvez des difficultés techniques pendant la séance, par exemple 2 interprètes qui parlent en même temps, communiquez avec nous dans la boîte de clavardage qui est indiquée en bas de l'écran, chat, et on va vous aider à régler le problème rapidement.
Thank you. Also, when you are at a certain point, we will have Q&A, and that'll be towards the end where we'll have our raise hand Q&A. Just so folks know, raise hand is generally found in your reaction function on your toolbar, or if you are calling in, it is *9. And we'll be using that towards the latter portion of the conference. We'd love to have folks who are speaking French raise their hand and speak French. That will be translated to our presenters, and you will hear the answers in French.
Aussi, vous devez savoir qu'il y aura une période de questions vers la fin de la séance et vous pouvez poser vos questions en français. Vous n'avez qu'à utiliser la fonction lever la main que vous trouvez, je crois, dans Reactions, réaction au bas de l'écran, ou sinon étoile 9 sur un téléphone. Donc, vous pouvez poser vos questions dans la langue de votre choix et vous allez entendre la traduction aussi dans la langue de votre choix.
Okay, everybody, I'm going to enable the interpretation. Give me a moment. Okay, everybody, welcome. Again, this is Intro to Organic Seed Production Part 2. Thank you so much. We're so glad, and just take a moment and make sure you've chosen your language. I appreciate it. So glad to have you all with us. We're so glad you could have chosen to join us this afternoon. This workshop is part of the 2021 Northeast Organic Seed Conference, and of course, this session is being recorded. The NOFA New York Winter Conference and the Northeast Organic Seed Conference join together every 2 years. You're participating in a third such collaboration. Please enjoy as many workshops as possible at this dual online conference. The pre-existing workshops that have occurred in the last couple days are available recorded. My name is Heron Breen. I live in St. Albans, Maine. I both farm seed and also work at a seed company. I am privileged, definitely, and lucky to be able to do both. Next slide, thank you, Crystal. Folks, this is our community agreements. These are the rules of engagement, as you might call them, or just the choices of being respectful. This is how we are hoping to abide this week in the Zoom platform. Most of this is based upon respect for ourselves and each other. A couple key ones is one mic, which means if someone has raised their hand and is asking a question or is speaking, please do not speak over them. 2, be careful of using jargon. Many of us are so used to speaking our own languages, whether that's acronyms or the language of farming of seed, that sometimes we're using terms or abbreviations. Also, be patient. This is a virtual platform. Technical issues are going to arise, not may, with you and with us. We're doing our best and we'll get through it. Next slide. We want to acknowledge that we are on land that was managed and is managed and lived with today before European colonization. Please take a moment to reflect upon where you are in this moment. If you know what Indigenous community lives or lived with the land you are on right now, feel free to acknowledge that in the chat. I live in Central Maine, that is Greater Wabanaki Territory. If you want to learn more, there's a helpful website link on this slide. Many of us are coming to this workshop not from the Northeast, and this website expands to a greater map. It also encapsulates tribal and indigenous nations throughout the world. Let's take a moment of silence, of prayer, and of mindfulness today, not just to acknowledge the lands of our indigenous community, but also Martin Luther King Day. Just take a moment. Thank you. Next slide. The In Living Color space, we're so thankful to have the services of facilitators Amanda David and Madonna Bushi throughout the week. You can see on this slide that they're offering 24-hour email support as well as scheduled open room support, and you can contact them via those emails to schedule time to join them. Thank you. Next slide. Also, we've had some wonderful keynotes this week already. Laura Legnick was amazing. We're looking forward to Banu and Brian coming up. Please make time. Next slide. We're also really lucky to have the works of the University of Vermont with us today. They're really collaborators on a grant that's been supporting this seed conference. And we have some UVM note takers joining us today. Their goal is to take some notes that will be part of a needs assessment that will be taking place on Sunday the 24th, a free event. We hope you all attend. No personal or identifiable information will be made during these notes. These note takers will be also adding a map to the chat for us all to kind of share where we're at. Please, if you're the University of Vermont note takers, could you please identify yourself in the chat and say hello? Next slide. As I said, we have this wonderful needs assessment day on Sunday, January 24th. Hannah Tragis and Jackie Pilati, who you've seen speak and moderate on Saturday and Sunday, will be our moderators for that day. The best way to reach this is actually a link that brings us to all the free conference sessions that are available. There's free conference sessions available with the NOFA Winter Conference as well as the Seed Conference. And please go through that portal that we'll be placing in the chat shortly to access those free conference sessions, the needs assessment chief among those. So please register, get signed up in advance, and we'll see you then. Next slide. I'll be handing this back to Crystal and Maggie, who are today's moderators, as well as myself. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Heron. And I'm just going to say a quick hello. My name is Crystal Stewart-Courtens. I've been organizing all of the vegetable sessions at the NOFA Winter Conference this year, and we're really delighted.
Oh, Crystal, you're muted.
No? Can anybody else hear me?
Maybe I'm muted.
I can hear you.
I can hear you.
There you go.
Heron's heard too much of my voice lately. That happens to people, Heron. So I am delighted that we've been able to interlace the two sides of this conference this year and to really intentionally include vegetable producers and gardeners with the seed conference. And
I'm gonna interrupt just for a second. I think folks, one of the reasons we're not hearing Crystal is because those of us who want to hear English, I'm realizing if we put mute original audio on, we're not hearing Crystal. So just choose English. Do not choose mute original audio if you are choosing English. Okay, our apologies. Thank you so much. Please continue. Crystal, give folks a moment. Be well.
all right, is that better? For folks that could not hear me, hearing me. Perfect. Okay. Good. Great. So I just want to welcome everyone, vegetable farmers, seed producers, community seed keepers alike. It's really great to have some intentional spaces that we're coming together with the two parts of this conference. I miss seeing all of you in person, but I'm really glad that we're taking this opportunity to learn and to hopefully promote more seed production in the Northeast and help vegetable producers and gardeners to understand the importance of Northeast seed production. So thank you so much for being here. Hope you enjoy the rest of the vegetable sessions and the rest of the seed sessions and all the rest of the NOFA sessions too. And I will go ahead and hand it off to Maggie and go back to my slide responsibilities.
Thank you, Crystal. By way of introduction, I'm Maggie Ericksen. I work at Mowing Organic Seeds, and I have the privilege of moderating this wonderful panel with 4 very experienced Northeast seed growers. And in a minute, I'm going to ask them to introduce themselves in the order in which they will speak. But first, a bit of housekeeping. We do encourage you to put any questions that come to mind in the chat. And Crystal and Heron and I will be monitoring that and saving questions. There will be short Q&As after each person speaks, and there will be a longer Q&A at the end, time allowing. So if you put your question in there, it will be captured. And just know that the presenter may not see it as they're presenting because they will be busy speaking. So with that, I would ask Roberta to please introduce yourself and your farm and where you're located.
Hello, I'm Roberta Bailey. I live in central Maine, Wabanaki territory, and I live on an 18-acre farm, 7-tree farm, and it's very close to the Kennebec River. So I think of that history of the Wabanaki a lot. And on our farm, I farm with my husband, Rob Lemire, and on our farm, we focus on garlic and seed production, and we have 18 acres to do that.
Thank you, Roberta. Matthew, would you introduce yourself?
Sure. I'm Matthew Goldfarb with Fruition Seeds in the Finger Lakes of New York, which is Haudenosaunee-Seneca lands, and looking forward to sharing with you all this afternoon.
Thank you, Matthew. Leah?
Hi, I'm Leah from Camp Hill Village and Turtle Tree Seed, and we are on Mohican lands.
Thank you, Leah. And Kristen?
Hello, I'm Kristen Loria. I'm a graduate student at Cornell. I work on breeding and variety trialing of beans as well as vegetable crops. I'm also a dry bean grower on the side. I am outside of Ithaca, New York, on Haudenosaunee land as well. And I'll be sharing also a file that has compiled resources from all of our presentations. So I'll send that file in the chat now. And so hopefully that will give you all the links that you're looking for as we go through our shows.
Thank you, Kristen. I also want to call attention to the fact that we are joined by Chris Sanford of Yonder Hill Farm and Matthew Glenn of Muddy Fingers Farm, who presented this morning. So they are resources in the chat function for questions as well. All right, let's get started. Roberta, take it away.
Okay. Let's see. I think you're one slide in. The next one down. Next slide. So this is the view from the house, from my house about 5 years ago. I am actually sitting where all those timbers are, looking up the field, and it's very snowy. We have 18 acres, and I think the message that I want to give you today is that seed production can be on a very small scale or a very large scale. People come to my farm and they're really astounded by how little land it actually takes. I mean, you know, 100 pepper plants can produce a pound of seed, and 100 pepper plants don't need much more, you know, much more than a foot per plant in a row. So that can be quite small. Next slide. This is my backyard garden. I intersperse pepper production and flowers and medicinal herbs. So in different areas, I may have, very different crops, and they can be next to a row of beans that I'm picking for my family as well. So next. We can just flip through a bunch of these pictures. These are some of the things. Most of what I produce is hot pepper seed, but we have Elka poppies. These are poppies. And that's like a 60-foot row, and I'll get a couple of pounds off of it anyway. Next, Arnica chamasanus, which is a perennial. And what I like about what I've been doing is staggering. I was growing a lot of pepper seed, and all of that time and production was landing in October. And I wanted to bring on more farm income, but I didn't want to have more work in October. And so I started doing medicinal herbs and flowers, which the arnica I start harvesting in June, and that goes into early August at the latest. Next. And spilanthes, next. Morning glories and columbine. This is double take columbine. I start harvesting that in June. Next. And this is a picture of me harvesting the double take columbine. You can see it's a very small production. I actually have a lot more demand for it than I have. It's a biennial, so I'm trying to increase my space with that. Continue. Next. Rice and cucumbers, and then go on. Next. Fish. The fish peppers I put in there because I really wanted to say to people that in some situations, everybody's sort of exploring whether seed production fits on their farm or not. And I think that even more important than growing seed to sell is starting to save seed on your own farm to make it adapt to your land and your specific needs. So many commercial seed productions are highly chemical, and they have nothing to do with an organic crop production system. And I find that when I'm saving my own seed, that year after year, I'm selecting for plants that are doing well in my soil and in my conditions. And especially right now with global warming, I'm selecting more and more for plants that are surviving. And next. So this is what my hot pepper production looks like. I do, hot peppers are self-pollinating, but because I'm producing for 6 to 8 seed companies, I want to make sure that they are 100% isolated. Some people there's black plastic in here and row cover and low hoops. Some people have a hard time with pollination inside of the hoops. I have a very windy farm, and I've actually crawled in through the hoops weeding and just realized that the buffeting of the wind on the hoops is shaking the plants. I plant the peppers fairly close together, about a foot apart, in a pattern that I call a 5 pattern, where there's one in the middle and then two on either side, and then going up the row. So they're touching each other and they're getting a lot of pollination. Next. This is what they look like later in the season. I take the covers off, and the rows in between them are mulched with leaves. Next. So that's our mulching system. And this is a picture of Austa Valley, which is a tomato that I got from a friend who brought it back from Italy. And it had a lot of off types in it. And, and I've been selecting it for something that works well on my farm. So that's just a reminder of making things work for you on your farm. Next. Go back to the one before that. The slide before this is check black. It's not a great slide, but it reminds me to talk about this had like skinny peppers and fat peppers and some with a lot of seed and different shapes, and I selected them for what I thought was the traditional heirloom look, but also for production on my farm. And so I just kept saving seed from plants that produced really well on my farm. Now let's get to the nitty gritty of how this works. This is Chamayo del Norte, and this pepper, as I said, most peppers, 100 plants will produce about, on average, a pound of seed. If I don't know the pepper really well, I'll plant 120 or 150. Chamayo del Norte takes about 50 plants to produce a pound. But here I was looking for, I'm selecting for a really good shape. Next. And carrot, this is carrot, I can't remember. Anyway, Hungarian carrot or something like that. Next. This is Matchbox, which is a variety that I bred. I love it because it produces really well in cold and wet climates. Continue. And this is another one, Dulcinea, that I'm just finishing up. The flesh is sweet and the peppers are hot. Next. And this is Thai hot. So here's a situation where I'm producing inside of a greenhouse in pots. They produce pretty well in the field, but I find it's just one more easy isolation to put them inside. And I sometimes use my high tunnel as an isolation as well. Next. So I harvest my peppers, and then I'm using a wet process to clean them. So I'm literally taking the peppers, grinding them up in a food processor. I used to tape the blades, but then I took one blade and I just rubbed it against a granite stone and dulled the actual cutting surface. Most peppers seeds do not get cut by the blades. Every once in a while, like a serrano pepper will. Next. So I'm using a mask because they're pretty volatile, and I always use cold water. I can't harvest dry peppers anymore because I've developed such a sensitivity. That's something to pay attention to. And you're adding so much time if you're drying peppers and then trying to extract the peppers. So then these peppers get put, I put a little bit in a bucket and I add water to them, and the good seed sinks and the pulp and the immature seeds float. And that's one of the beauties of using a wet process, is that your immature seed floats as well. Next. And then I feed them to my chickens, who absolutely love them, love the pulp. They'll eat, I can cover the ground with pulp, and by the next day it's all gone. They pick out the seeds first. Next. And this is what they look like when they're drying. I'm obviously on a very small scale. I have screens. You can go to the next slide. Next. And I use a fan. So these are drying in October, and sometimes I have really good heat in my greenhouse, and sometimes, you'll get a stretch of cloudy weather. So I'll use a fan not directly on the seed, but just to give air circulation. If I'm going into mid-November, sometimes I'll use heat. Next. And I guess that's the end of my slides, but I will say that if I need to, if the seed is still not really, really super dry, I'll take it a little bit at a time and put it in my Excalibur dehydrator on a very, very low setting and just bring it down, bring the moisture down inside. As far as tomatoes go, there's some people ask if they can grow a tomato crop and also produce, sell tomatoes at the same time, or if you can split a crop like that. I primarily just grow seed crops for seed. I do think that commercially you could grow a tomato crop and use the blemished ones or the imperfect ones for your actual seed. But I also think that it's really hard to make sure you have enough for both needs, and I would encourage keeping them separate. So that's what I have so far.
That was great. Thank you, Roberta. We do have several questions that came through.
Okay.
So I'm just going to read them to you and take them. What are some of your favorite pepper varieties to grow?
My favorite pepper variety is Czech Black. It's gorgeous. It's black, immature, and it ripens to this garnet a garnet that's over the black, and it is gorgeous. And it's got nice heat, but it's not, but the flavor comes through and it's not too hot.
Excellent. How cold of a climate can matchbox peppers be grown in?
It is, they mature very early. We get, I don't know, we're in central Maine and it does really well. I would encourage you to try it in a cold climate. I think it would do well.
How do you keep seed from flying off the sieves during the drying process?
Off the screens, I don't ever directly put a fan on them. It's moving air above them or below them. And I also am really careful not to put two varieties next to each other in case you ever get rodent pressure running across, or something like that running across. Always like one on one side and one on the other, or one at a time.
That's great. The next couple of questions are actually about rodent pressure. So I'll have you answer that one and then we'll move to Matthew and save some of the other questions for the end. How do you deal with rodent pressure when drying seed in your greenhouse?
I use live traps and try to relocate them if they're there. I have two very aggressive cats who hang out in the greenhouse all the time. And so I try to not have rodents. If there's rodents, it's really difficult. Yeah.
Great. Thank you so much, Roberta. The remainder of the questions we're going to save for the end, and I'm going to ask Matthew Goldfarb to take over.
There we go. Just unmuting and sharing my screen. Share sound. Let's see. Hopefully everybody can see my screen.
Yes.
So thanks for the intro and thanks, Roberta, for sharing that. I appreciated your comment just about does seed production fit on your farm, and making sure that the varieties you're choosing are well adapted, or you are doing the seasonal work of making sure they become adapted. So it's a great framing. And what I'm going to talk about is not so much cucurbit seed production in and of itself. So watermelons, melons, all the different squashes, cucumbers. But kind of what our experience has been going through a scaling of doing that work, from hand scale and hand tools to what I call small scale mechanized equipment. And I just want to run you through that progression. So let me see if I can advance my slide. Here we go. So typically with production, when we're talking about seeds, you all, if you're growing any of these cucurbits, you're doing great. I'm sure you know tons more than I do about growing good cucurbits. The things you need to start considering for seed production have to do with isolation distance for pollinations, as well as if there's any seed-borne diseases that you might be passing on to the next generation. And that information is all about on the internet and books in our communities of farmers and seeds folks. So that info is definitely very accessible. Again, I'm going to be talking about the kind of the scaling and processing part of it. And then the other piece to think about, which we're not going to get into, I just want to make sure is in the back of your minds, is when you're producing this seed, whether is it for farm scale use, is it for your community's use, is it for resale directly, is it for a different market that you are selling it to a distributor? So just being mindful of as you're exploring this, where's the seed going? So, well, we'll just go with this order. Hold on, let me bounce around. Let's just see. All right, we're skipping that slide. So, yeah, I'll start here. So, we produce any given year 3 to 5 acres of seeds, anywhere from 60 to 80 crops, and some of the crops might be at the scale like Roberta was showing. It might just be a 100-foot bed, and some of the crops might be a 1/4 acre up to an acre, especially on some of the cucurbit productions we've done. And if you're starting out at hand scale, as we did, the lower part of the screen, it's purchasing things like a shop vac, a log splitter, some screens and box fans. Like, you probably already have most of this, and it's not going to cost you that much to acquire any of it. The steps we've gone through in our mechanized equipment, which I will show you more of, there's something called a winnow wizard for winnowing, a pumpkin seed harvester, which is pictured here in blue behind the tractor, a seed dryer, which we built with a local Mennonite fabricator friend, and something we call a whirligig that does have a different name. I just can't pronounce it. So let's get right into it. So hand processing, and this has worked for most of us and many of us at all different scales. We've produced half-acre plus individual lots of cucurbits and done it all by hand. It just takes weeks. But it's in this image on the left, it's just a rod maul. So you can just put the squash on a log and drop the maul and it'll split your squash. So you have to open your fruit up one way or another. In the back is Dandy shop vacuuming. That's the hose she's carrying or holding. She's shop vacuuming out the seeds. We just find you either have to scoop them out or suck them out, and they just come out a little cleaner and more singulated and less pulp when you suck them out. In this middle, this is our hand processing washing of, again, we're still just talking about squash right now, but we just have a series of different size hardware cloth that we just spray and brush and scrub through different screens until you get separate out the pulp and the seed, and then you would go from there, you dry it. So this is one of our drying rooms in one of the barns, just a bunch of screens. All the holes in the back is where we would mount fans. So similar to Roberta, we just have air moving across. And that's how we would hand dry them. All of these stages they work really well. They all require certain amounts of cleanup time. Definitely a lot of just processing time. Even once you get to the drying stage, every one of those screens, we have to, after about 6 hours, we have to pull the screen off, mix the seed back together because it kind of just makes a cake, and then put the seed back in. And then sometimes we have to rotate the screen. So throughout, there's just a lot of touching. And this would be the mechanized process. And I don't think the videos are attached at the moment, but I'll walk you through. So on the left, that is a pumpkin seed harvester. I've been looking at kind of what they call vine seed crop harvesters for a bunch of years, and they typically range. A decent used one might be like 20,000 or 15 if you're really lucky and it's all rusted out, somewhere maybe in like Oregon or Washington. And new ones run like 25, 35, 50, 80, 100,000. So way beyond what I was interested in getting into. So after lots of hemming and hawing and looking on sites in India and China and Pakistan, I found this one out of China and took a risk. It's designed for pumpkin seeds, so a little bit larger, and where we're looking for is something that could do all the different size squash seeds, as well as watermelons, cucumbers, and maybe melons, although we try and save as much of the pulp as possible on melons because it's too good not to, but it will do melons. So we've had to modify this, and I may have a screen. If not, happy to talk about it later. But we've had to modify the screen sizes on it so it can handle different seeds. But let me actually just zoom forward and see if I do have the videos. Nope, I didn't make it. So I'll just explain how it works. There's kind of a hopper up here. Throw the fruit in. It gets macerated, goes through an auger and a spinning process, and all the pulp kind of in big chunks come flying out the back, and all the seed comes out a separate chute. It has turned projects that might take 5 days. We could do for like 3 of us. We can do in an hour or 2. That includes cleanup time, so it has really changed how we operate and what else we can do on the farm other than process squash all fall. So after you've got the seed, it still comes out dirty. There's still lots of pulp and small bits. This is the whirligig, which I do have a link for on my last slide, so you'll be able to see it. We picked this one up used, and it just spins the seeds. It's got a plate at the bottom that you can adjust, so smaller things go out one way and larger things go out the other, and you can get the seed really clean. You can put like a 5-gallon bucket in at a time and just crank through it. And then the last mechanized piece, you'll see in the front on the right, you'll see in the front of the screen of the image are some screens. So these are just bigger screens in our greenhouse. You can see some fans underneath that we still use for various things. But in the back, you'll see the stainless steel drum on a black frame. Just imagine a root washer, except it's for drying seeds, and it's perforated steel instead of wooden slats. And we have and instead of water going in to clean your roots, we have air forced in through the bottom that is drying the seeds. So typically, if I was doing something on our screens, it might take 48 hours, 72 hours to get a really good dry seed crop with lots of mixing this, coming in once or twice a day and mixing the seed by hand. This, as long as the greenhouse is 75 degrees or warmer, I can put it in the morning when we're done, processing, and by the next morning, the seed's dry and I can take it out and put another lot in. So it's been all of these pieces of equipment as well, we use for other seed processing. So it's not just one dimensional. And then the last piece of processing that's kind of that smaller scale box fan versus winnow wizard. And we still, actually, I don't think I used a box fan this year, but box fans are amazing. It's a great way to winnow seed. They're super efficient and effective, and you really don't need anything more. The advantage of the winnow wizard, it does the same action of modulating airflow, and you can sort seeds based by density. This just allows, when you have a lot more seed, you don't have to stand there and slowly pour seed in front of the fans for hours at a time. You can fill the hopper and be working on other stuff. So that is just some things to consider. And then, right, so here's some of that cost breakdown. I showed you all the different parts and what they cost. So in 2018, this is just for cucurbit. So we had about, and just in from harvest to having dry, clean seed ready to get germ tested. So none of the production costs of what does it cost to grow an acre of cucumbers, but once from harvest to the end. So we had about a little over $10,000 in 2018 in labor, and in 2020, labor plus the CapEx expense that we amortized over 7 years, it was $3,600. We produced pretty much the same amount of seed. So there was a huge cost savings. And the piece that is more critical to us and just how we function as a team and everything else we want to do on the farm and with our lives is we gained about 500 hours for our team to take care of themselves, take care of each other, take care of the farm. And this is just a slide if you want to screenshot it. I think they're also sharing these slides and resources somewhere else. So that thing that I call the whirligig is the DYB VIG seed cleaner, the Dig Big seed cleaner. But there's all the links, and I think that's all I got. So let me stop.
Great, thank you, Matthew. And yes, the slides from all the presentations will be turned into PDFs and be made available to attendees after the session is over. There are some questions, Matthew, that came in for you through the chat. So you ready for trial by fire?
Yeah.
Okay. How many isolation fields do you have for cucurbits?
3.
Right on. What diseases do you see on your cucurbits, and how do you phytosanitize?
Yeah, the main one that is seed-borne for us is gummy stem blight, and we either use hydrogen peroxide or bleach diluted that we soak the seeds in. We've been sticking with hydrogen peroxide. I'm not totally clear on all of the organic standards. With that, I'm pretty sure it's still allowed, but it's a diluted hydrogen peroxide that we soak for 10 minutes. If we're concerned at all about the seed after it comes out of the washing stage, so before we dry it, and then we would rinse it, and then it's good to go.
Great. Looks like we have someone from Canada who said in Canada the hydrogen peroxide is allowed for organic.
Hallelujah.
Do you ferment the seeds, cucurbit seeds?
None of the squash seed. We just go from extraction to washing right away. We haven't had a lot of success with floating, like decanting seed, like Roberta was talking about with peppers or tomatoes, you can let them sit in water overnight, and then the heavier seeds tend to sink. A lot of them just seem to like to have air pockets, or there's too much pulp in there for it to work that well. So we just go straight to washing and screening, and we now use that whirligig. But even before the whirligig, we would just screen. But on cucumbers, we ferment just like you would tomatoes, because they have that outer gel sac that it just comes off a lot easier if you let it ferment for a day or two. And then on watermelons, it really depends. Sometimes we do, sometimes we don't. Depends how on that. It's not so much a ferment, it's more how well is the seed sinking or floating. And if we feel like, we can just let it float let it be in water for the day, and we don't have to spend as much time cleaning it, then we'll just leave it and come back to it the next day. But you don't have to. And on like a melon, a cantaloupe and muskmelon, we don't ferment those. So it's really just the cucumbers that we ferment.
Okay. I'll throw one more at you and then we'll save the rest for the end here. How did you modify the screens for the cucurbit seed processor from China?
Oh yeah, I'm sorry that I didn't have the video for this one, because I also get to do the sound effects when I play that video. But reach out to me and I can send you some pictures and we can talk about it more. You do have to be pretty skilled fabricator, because all of it, essentially there was one screen that's perforated steel that I think is, it's probably 5/8, no, it's less, it's smaller than that. Maybe it's a 3/8 inch hole that was too big. So we had to have a way that whole barrel can come off. And then we made another barrel that was the same exact size, dimensions to mount on, but was 1 gauge smaller. But it doesn't come that way from the manufacturer. So you have to cut some parts off. You have to weld on some new pieces, make some bolts, align things, and then make these like 3-foot long cylinders identical. So beyond my skill set, but that's why we have friends. But I'm happy to show you pictures, videos, talk you through it if anybody's curious. And then the only other thing that, if I could just steal one other second with this, is I know there used to be the mobile seed cleaning unit that floated around, and it's kind of had stops and starts. And before we had this, and I was talking with Tom Stearns at High Mowing, and they have similar equipment, just scaled larger. Tom had offered me, because I was just struggling with like months worth of doing this stuff by hand, and he said, well, if you can get it trucked up here, we'll just process it for you. And which was a really generous offer from Tom. And I think I just want to extend that most of the time this equipment, it's for especially the extractor, is not being used. So if anybody's in the region and can crunch the numbers and load up a trailer, feel free to bring a ton or 5 tons of fruit over, and we can figure out a way to get it jammed through in a morning.
Great, Matthew. Thank you for that. And thanks for the presentation. Leah, I'm going to pass it on to you.
Thank you. So I'm Leah from Turtle Tree Seed, and I'm ready to talk about onion seed. Crystal, do you want to move it along? Thank you. So onion seed production, unlike the other seeds that we've already heard about, of course, onions are biennials. And so there are a number of considerations with biennials. And I'm going to just go through a little bit of that. So why onion seed? onion seed can fit really well with, if you're producing a lot of onions anyway, and they're open pollinated onions, you can reasonably easily make a good selection out of your production lot and save those separately for planting for seed next year. We don't have any species in the Northeast that cross with them in the wild, that are wild, so that makes it easy. And also it's varieties aren't always available, as we know. Things go in and out of availability. And so if you really rely on a specific open pollinated variety commercially, or even a hybrid variety, although it would take a much longer time for you to select out a good selection, it might be worthwhile to save your own seed, just so that you absolutely know that you have seed. And then you can also select for the criteria that are most important and critical for your farm and your area. The difficulties are, of course, it takes 2 years, so it takes space in your fields for 2 years. When onions grow their second year, they grow tall and they get stocky and they fall over. So you really need to stake them. In the Northeast, it's a great benefit to roof your onions, your second year onions as they're blooming. If you have a greenhouse, a hoop with open sides, that works really well. But of course, your hoop you might need for other crops as well. So that's something to think about. If you don't have a large enough population of onions, they can get inbreeding depression, which can cause your strain to collapse and you need to get new seed. So that's something that you just have to make sure that you do have enough room to have a significant population, which will probably be more onion seed than you need for any given year. Most commercially available varieties are hybrids these days. And if you want to untangle a hybrid, that's a great project. It will take, quite a few years of selection. And if you think one selection round will take you 2 years, unless you have a farm in Central America where you can ship down and do your second year, it's going to be a long-term project. It can be worth it, but it is a long-term project. Can I go to the next slide, please? Okay, so for the first year, onion growth is just the same as growing for vegetables, really, except for that for us, we try not to coddle our onions too much. We try not to, when we're growing them for seed, because we want to stress test them a little bit and just make sure that any sort of, that we're not giving them the best conditions. We're not giving them the absolute optimal conditions. We're not giving them water every time they're thirsty. We want to make sure that any weirdness in the onion genes comes out, and that, sorry, I will get to the untangling question, and that any onions that we are selecting are really can take a little bit of, can take a little bit of stress and still produce good onions. So the points where we do selection at germination for vigor, at planting out, anything that's small that hasn't done well, we just chuck that. Then pre-harvest, we walk through and just see, are there any plants that don't look right? And then at harvest, we do a selection, and that's the main selection is at harvest. And that harvest we do in sections. So we have quite a large crew. We work with people with developmental challenges, and so we are a lot of people. And each person will take, 8 feet of bed feet. We'll pull all the onions out of that 8-foot section, and then out of that 8-foot section, you'll take the best, 5 onions or 3 onions or 7 onions. And the reason that we do it like that instead of harvesting everything and then doing the selection is that, of course, conditions can vary through your field. And so one side of the field might be growing fantastic onions through no fault of the seed or the onions themselves, but just because that side of the field has much better conditions than the other side. So by doing it in small sections, you make sure that you're actually selecting for how the onions themselves are performing rather than what the field conditions are. Then we also do a post-harvest selection. It's just a small look through to make sure that everybody did a good selection on their onions. And then we do, for storage onions, we also do a selection after storage for bolting or yeah, any kind of storage considerations. So our selection criteria are shape, size, growth habit, lack of visible disease and disease resistance. Flavor, we don't always, I have to admit, we don't always taste every single onion. You can do it by sort of lopping off a bit at the top and tasting that. And then usually I think they're dipped in a bit of wood ash to make sure that they dry out and can be stored. And then also storage potential. The diseases that we see, just to say, the one that we see most often is like a pink root rot. Considerations for your second year growth. So here you can see in this picture, there's some netting, and that is actually holding up gladiola stems. But that's also a netting support that we use for onions. It's similar to the ones used for cut flower in the cut flower industry. So planting distance, there's going to be a slide later that you'll see onions planted way too far apart in their second year. But they actually don't need much space at all in their second year. Just you can plant them, a finger's width apart. They have done all of their nutrient intake and they're just sending up their stalk, and that's all they need. They need very little room, but they do need structural support. If you're doing storage types and you've stored them over the winter, that's great. You can just plant them early in the spring. If you've done non-storage types, however, you will need to plant them soon after harvest. You'll need to plant them in your hoop house and grow them over the winter. They don't, obviously because you can't store them. So you'll need to think about a different way of doing that. Roofing is, we find that roofing greatly increases our seed yield, but it is a total pain. It's just a complete pain in the butt. Yeah, those are the pros and cons of roofing. You get a lot more seed. It tends to be higher quality seed. It's a lot of extra work. I think it's worth it, but you may or may not on your farm. Harvesting times and methods. Onion seed is challenging because it ripens. The whole seed head is not ripe at the same time. And also various seed heads throughout your stand will not all ripen at the same time. Because we're blessed with lots of people, we're able to do, I'll talk about roofing in a minute, don't worry. Sorry. Because we're blessed with lots of people, we're able to walk through the onion field, often and cut heads that seem ready. And we say they're ready when about 50% of the little individual seed heads are open and showing the black seeds coming out. Before that, it's going to be hard to get them dried. And after that, it's you're going to start losing seed. And then on to seed cleaning. I'm going to move on to the next slide. So this is about the roofing. This is a picture of the onion roofing, and these onions are planted way too far apart when you're not doing everything yourself, and you instruct somebody else to do it. Sometimes it gets done funny. This is a very small little stand of onions, and we use this clear plastic like Dino glass roofing. Actually, if you could move on to the next slide, I think there's sort of the components. Yeah, oops. You want to go back one? Yep, there you go. So it's just T-posts. We have these little, I guess they're 2x2 like bars, wooden slats. And then we've taken, if you have a little bit of welding skill, you can make these guys pretty easily. And if you have a metal cutter, if you don't, then I'm not sure how to make them. So they're just square bars cut in half, stuck on top of another square bar that can fit over the T-post. And then the wooden beams sort of sit in that to support the roof. And then we also have the wooden beams on top as well, tied on with holes through the dino glass. And then if you want to go back to the previous slide, because it's very windy where we are, we have sandbags that we hold the roof on with, just to make sure it doesn't fly off in the storm. As I said, lots of steps, but it ends up being worth it for us in the end. All right, what were the questions?
Ready for questions. Okay, thank you for that, Leah. There are some that came through. What is the minimum population required to prevent inbreeding?
I wouldn't go lower than like 80 bulbs. But ideally, I would say 200 is a reasonable amount.
And a follow-up on the roofing, what is the purpose of the roofing?
It keeps the onions a little bit drier, and it keeps them drier as they're flowering especially.
Excellent. And can you elaborate on what untangling a hybrid refers to?
Sure. So that's basically taking a hybrid, which is two inbred lines that are crossed, and typically hybrids don't make reliable seed stock to grow your own seed. So what you have to do is you have to grow that several times and find in those genetics, you have to find the qualities that were from the original hybrid and pull those out. So with your selection, you're always selecting back towards that onion that you remember that was so good that you loved.
That was a very good description of untangling a hybrid. Thank you, Leah. I'm going to save the rest of the questions for the end, and we'll give Kristen the floor to talk about beans. Kristen, take it away.
All right. Get my screen shared here. Let's see, and okay. So just a note to start out. I would say that my seed growing experience pales in comparison to the presenters you've heard so far, and probably some of you in the audience as well. So I definitely invite anybody to share relevant thoughts or experiences in the chat, and we can visit it after I go through my slides. So, okay, so in all likelihood, you will probably be growing a common bean variety.
Kristen, I'm going to stop you for just a minute. I don't think we're seeing your screen share.
Yeah, not yet.
Interesting. Oh, you know what? I know what happened. Okay. I don't think I quite finished.
There you go.
Okay.
Perfect.
Now we're seeing your desktop. There you go. Perfect.
So, well, you haven't really missed anything yet, so that's fortunate. Thanks for letting me know. So, all right. So yeah, you're probably growing common bean. We do a little bit of lima bean and runner bean production, I would say, for seed in the Northeast. I think common bean is the most straightforward and adapted to our climate, and especially our sort of growing degree days. I found runner bean to be challenging in hot seasons. The flowers seem to abort more easily. And so it's just definitely something to be aware of course, what species you're growing in terms of making your plans. So in terms of picking the seed that you will grow for your seed crop. Of course, if you're going for a seed company, they will give you the variety and that will be straightforward. But if not, definitely pick a variety that you know does well on your farm, or do a trial year first. Because as you can see from some heirloom variety trial results here in Vermont, the seed yield can really vary dramatically between varieties and between production years. Also think carefully if you're purchasing your own stock seed about getting high quality seed. Seed-borne disease is a very big issue in dry beans, and that's the reason why most dry bean seed commercially is produced out in Western areas. So try to buy seed that has been grown, as a seed crop rather than, say, culinary beans. And if you're working with a seed company, definitely have clear communication on whether they're doing any disease testing or if they have expectations for the seed that you're producing with respect to disease testing. Maybe some other folks can chime in on that later on. Okay, so isolation is pretty straightforward for beans. It's a self-pollinating crop. We can see more outcrossing when we have high pollinator populations. So the recommendation tends to be 50 to 100 feet of space between your varieties. Runner beans are more outcrossing, and so we generally say half a mile to a mile if you're growing multiple varieties of runner bean. Okay. So in terms of seed production, of course, growing a dry bean seed crop is more or less like growing edible dry bean. That will vary if you're doing a pole variety, of course. And really there are more like 4 growth habits in common bean. And it's definitely useful to know for sure what growth habit you have before you plant that seed. And so you can do a fairly kind of mechanized seeding and cultivating setup with bush varieties, but of course with half runners or poles, you're going to need some sort of trellis. And generally that looks like T-posts, netting, wire, etc. There's some interesting things happening with live trellising. Ken Green told me about a farmer out in the Midwest who is combining pole beans grown on grain sorghum. So that's a pretty fun idea. And in terms of this seed-borne disease thing, one easy thing to do is if your stock seed wasn't tested for disease, you can surface sterilize that seed before planting. I've done this with bleach and ethanol. I think there's probably other ways to do it, and it is allowable under organic certification, as someone mentioned. And that will kill inoculum on the seed coat itself. There can be pathogens that survive inside the seed, but that's much less common. And that, of course, only works for bacterial and fungal pathogens, not viruses. And so you would want to do this treatment right before you planted the seed because that wetting of the seed coat could reduce your germination if you wait too long. Okay. And in terms of harvest, again, very much like you would any grain crop. However, with a seed crop, timely harvest, especially in our humid climate, is very important to maximizing seed quality and reducing potential pathogen pressure on the seed. And so you want to look for that sort of buckskin parchment paper feeling and color of the pods. With pole beans, you're probably going to be having to hand harvest individual pods, but with bush varieties, you have the ability to cut or pull individual plants. I like cutting better because you get less dirt that you then have to deal with later. And you just want to kind of maximize the number of pods on that bush plant that are mature. And things like tarp or shade cloth. I think someone mentioned sheets earlier, which is a wonderful idea. are useful for just sort of piling plants and moving it to wherever it needs to go. And typically, folks in our region will dry in a hoop house or barn between harvest and threshing, because we're just not able to get plants and pods dry enough to be threshed out in under field conditions. Though I have come across interesting older publications about making bean stacks, kind of stacking plants around a T-post in the field. That's something I would like to try in the future, especially for larger seed lots where it's just not practical to bring it under cover. And threshing again, assuming folks here don't have combines, you're probably going to be doing this by hand or with stationary smaller equipment. And basically you just want the pods to be dry enough to easily open, but not too dry that you might risk splitting of the seed. And so there's various sort of DIY options here that perhaps other presenters might speak to, especially the converted wood chipper thresher, which has been brought up in the past. For smaller seed lots, just stomping on it with your feet or even driving over it with a truck or a tractor is, reasonably efficient. And there are also, of course, older stationary threshers available out there that are a great scale for sort of smaller seed production, though they can be a little bit hard to come by. And all the sort of DIY projects here are linked in that resource page that I shared, and I'm sure will also be available through the resources we share later. Okay, and in terms of winnowing, this has kind of been addressed already, but it's pretty straightforward using box fans, or if you're at a larger scale, the Winnow Wizard. There's also a pedal-powered fanning mill design that works similarly to the Winnow Wizard. And those will get all your light material out and maybe even some immature seeds. And then heavier things will have to be either screened out or hand-picked. Things like rocks, dirt clods. And you want to make sure to have nice low moisture once you're going to store your seed. 15% rather is kind of the technical number, but assuming you don't have a moisture meter, a nice long drying period in your hoop house or barn should do it. And if you're at all concerned about it, just store them in burlap or some other breathable bag. And I think this is an interesting point, kind of comparing the profitability of different seed crops. And I would say, the reason dry bean production, of course, has become so mechanized is it's a lot more efficient and more profitable that way. So I think any way that you can reduce the labor, especially in those threshing and cleaning stages, is going to make this crop a lot more worthwhile. And it certainly lends itself to systems where you can easily cultivate mechanically and otherwise kind of manage at the field scale with tractors and implements, because you are just getting a lower seed yield per sort of bed area than a crop like, say, tomato or squash perhaps. And hopefully other presenters here might have some input as well into sort of how they view the profitability of bean from the seed company perspective. So, all right, I think that's it. And these are the resources that I mentioned.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Kristen. There were a couple questions that came through the chat. One is, what diseases would you get a test for bean seed?
Yes, definitely. So bacterial diseases, in my experience, start my video. I'm not sure what that means. Oh, right. Okay. So in my experience, bacterial and fungal pathogens like bacterial blight, halo blight are the biggest, and there's some really good publications out of Washington State. Lindsay Dutoit, Dr. Lindsay Dutoit, who's speaking in the seed pathology session, which I highly recommend. She has a great publication on specifically seed-borne bean pathogens. Viruses tend to be less transmissible in our region, and as far as I know, in bean, but oftentimes we're getting some viruses, especially mosaic virus, coming into our region from Western grown seed. So that's something to look out for. You can't really do much once it's in the seed besides rogue out plants, but that seed sterilization I talked about is pretty effective for bacterial and fungal inoculum on the surface. And yeah, Lindsay's doing a session on disease management. I don't know what day, but I think that's going to be awesome.
I believe it's tomorrow morning at 10 a.m. Crystal, can you confirm?
That's correct.
Yeah.
Yep, that's correct.
Yeah, sure.
Did you mention anthracnose, Kristen?
I mentioned fungal pathogens, but yeah, anthracnose is definitely the fungal pathogen of our region for sure, which I tend to see less, interestingly, in my part of New York, but Heron seems to, up in Maine, you all seem to see that more, so hard to say.
Kristen, I'm going to give you another question that's specific to you here, and then maybe we can open it to some questions from the translators. You mentioned treating your stock seed. How would you recommend doing that, spraying or soaking?
So that is a soak, and yeah, the resource document, which I'll send out once again, has a little protocol in there, but it's so essentially doing a few minutes of soak in diluted bleach and then ethanol, and then the key is just to rinse those seeds really, really thoroughly with running water after sterilizing to make sure you don't reduce germination.
Great.
Oh, sorry, also, High Mowing has done some interesting research, which you might know about, Maggie, with steam treatment, which I think is really promising for bean, but I don't think we know for sure, like, yeah, at least what I've heard, it's still sort of in progress research.
Yes, Tom Stearns, who founded High Mowing, has been doing steam treatment research for about 5 years now. So in terms of science, it's pretty young, but there is some promising results. Yeah. Heron, do you want to open it to our French-speaking participants for questions?
Sure, folks. If you are interested in, if you speak French and you'd like to ask a question to the panel verbally, please raise your hand or use the *9 function, and you can have a sort of translated dialogue. Give folks a few seconds to find the function. If not, we'll just we'll move forward. Well, we'll see what happens. If anyone would like to raise their hand, French or speaking or otherwise, please do. Happy to take some more questions.
And if no one raises their hands, we can do a round robin with our presenters who all have a few remaining specific questions to them from the chat.
Maggie, take it away.
All right, Roberta, I'm going to start with you again. One of the questions was, what is your minimum distance between pepper varieties?
Well, because I isolate with row cover and they're under row cover, the plants are under row cover the entire season. Did I get lost here? No, I don't have to do any isolation between the crops. Otherwise, I don't know. I think it depends on what kind of pollinators you have in your area, but probably 100 to 200 feet would be safe.
Great. Matthew, I'm gonna give you one. What do you do with the leftover squash pulp? Is it composted or sold to a processor for another product?
It is composted. When we used to do it by hand, there was other outlets for it. But now that it's going through a steel and iron machine with lots of water, it's just composted.
Great. Leah, is a caterpillar tunnel less effective than roofing for onion seed crops?
It could be just as effective, but it needs to be fairly high because the onion seeds will get the seed stalks will get, 3.5, 4 feet tall. And you don't want to have them bumping up against the top of the tunnel. So it needs to be quite a tall, it would need to be a tall caterpillar tunnel. And then you'd also need to have it open at the sides so that pollinators can get in because they're insect pollinated.
Thank you for that. Kristen, one about bean production. I find as I am increasing bean seed production, pruning shears are too slow and not ergonomic. I'm thinking string trimmer. Has anyone tried it?
I haven't tried that. I think I've thought about trying that, and I think will in the future. It sounded like perhaps Heron had done that, a bush cutter.
Yeah, a bush cutter is a solid bladed weed whacker that's used to thin seedlings in forestry applications. And it's pretty cool, pretty crazy. You strap it on, it's got 2 handles. So if you really wanted to go nuts, you can actually usually rent them at equipment rental centers. So you could probably rent one for a day. Just be careful, they're a beast.
It's also a lot of like string trimmers also have replaceable heads where you can just get it looks like a circular saw blade, but you can just replace it, which is also, if you already own a trimmer, just look it up and see if they have other attachments for it.
All right, thank you all. I'm gonna just keep going around until we reach our time limit here, if that's okay with everybody. Roberta, back to you. Are you leaving the pepper pulp mixed with water undisturbed long enough just for pulp and heavy seeds to separate?
Yes. I'm literally in the chicken yard. I put about a third of a bucket of pepper pulp, a third full, and then fill it with water and let everything settle. It's a little tricky because of the water volume in the hose will sometimes, the pepper seed will sometimes get air bubbles on it. So I use a sieve and sort of swish it back and forth and wait for things to settle. So sometimes I'll have 5 buckets going at a time, 5 or 6 buckets going at a time, and I'm waiting for each one to settle. But then I just sluice, pour them off and immediately strain them and dry and spread them on the screens to dry.
Great, thank you. Matthew, there was a question that just says, how long do you soak? This could be referring to when you sanitize or when you ferment, so I'll let you answer both.
For if we're dealing with gummy stem blight, 10 minutes, and then we just rinse it really, really, really well. And if we're talking about leaving squash seed in water before we would clean it off, I mean, people leave it in overnight. I wouldn't go past 24 hours. Otherwise, you can get some staining in the seed. But if you want to use that as a method to see if the seeds will sink and everything else will float, I wouldn't go past 24 hours. And then for cucumber seeds, it just really depends on the temperature. You know, if you have your buckets or barrels in a warm place, like in a greenhouse, it's usually about 2 days to ferment them off. But if it's cooler and they're outside, it might be 3 days.
Great, thank you. Leah, how long do your onion seeds last? How do you make sure it is worth it when onion seeds do not usually last very long?
Yeah, so I mean, ideal storage conditions really is the answer. And of course, onion seeds, leek seeds, especially parsnip seeds, don't last a terrible long time, and they're all biennials, so they're a pain to grow. Yeah, ideal storage conditions, making sure you clean them and then store them. We have a storage unit that we use that we keep at a constant 45 degrees Fahrenheit and 45% relative humidity. And we find that the combination, so those two numbers, the degrees Fahrenheit plus the relative humidity should always stay below 100. And as long as there's a really nice constant temperature and humidity, and they're not they're not fluctuating a lot, then the seeds will stay for quite a number of years. And then, you know, just testing them every year. And if a seed lot starts to drop in germination, we'll blow out all the light seeds and retest it. And often those heavier seeds will get us some extra time on the seed lot. Also, I think somebody asked about cleaning onion seeds, and I thought to mention that earlier, but then it went out of my head. We actually use like a little like a meat grinder. And we just loosen it up very, very much. And it's small, so it takes a long time to get through a big lot, but we have people who are happy to sit and crank a little hand crank. And that kind of just rubs the seed heads enough and doesn't seem to damage the seeds, but it rubs them enough so that it can open those dried but unopened little seed pod heads.
Great, thank you. Kristen, one more for you. More of a comment, but maybe you can react to it. I was taught if you bite down and you can leave a tooth print in your bean, they are not ready to freeze. If you bite down and they crack, then they are ready to freeze, freezing to kill the pea weevil.
Yeah, I didn't put that in my presentation, but the freezing to get rid of any bugs is a great idea. Yeah, I think as long as those pods are nice and crispy dry when you thresh them, and the seeds don't feel soft, freezing is safe. That sounds good to me.
We are at time, so Heron and Crystal, I don't know if we have a hard stop or not.
I don't think we do, but I do want to take just a moment to let everybody know that there is a survey just for this entire session. There's actually a survey that encompasses all the sessions. So if you haven't heard about that yet, after every single session, you can either go to the app or you can click on the link that I just shared and select by day and then select by session to give feedback about the conference, which is really useful for planning future years.
Thank you, Crystal. There is a question here. Is there a Google Doc of all the shared links by chance?
Oh, I will send that file once again. It's
yes.
a Google Doc, but it's a Microsoft Word doc.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you for doing that, Kristen.
Thank you, Kristen.
And maybe we have just a moment for Crystal and I to share that survey link that we have as well.
Yes, I was having trouble locating it immediately, but we mentioned in the last session that Kristen and somebody asked what Kristen's going to do in her time after Cornell, and I did not put the cheeky response of, well, if everyone replies to the survey and we get funding, she's going to lead the charge on this training for people to learn how to grow seed in the Northeast, but that is not entirely incorrect. We're really hoping that Kristen can manage that project along with OSA and all of our excellent seed companies. So she just dropped that survey into the chat again. This is a 5-minute survey to just assess the need for additional, more robust training in the Northeast. So if you think that's a good idea and you'd like to hear more from Kristen, I sound like an infomercial now, please click on the link now. Thanks for your support.
Employment opportunities. We're creating this is economic development right now.
That's right.
I would just want to thank everybody who is our presenters for all the prep work that they took, making those presentations, and also just bringing their experience to all of us. And also thanks to the participants for just such an active chat and just active involvement in all the seed sessions so far. Really just pleased to have you. Anyone who's interested in seed growing, in around about 5 o'clock, we're having a sort of happy hour with folks in the seed company community who are doing contract seed work, who are looking for seed growers, and Maggie and I will be there, as well as other folks. And then this evening we're having, yes, you can bring a drink, Tripin. Yes, yes, I will be bringing a drink. And please join me. And we will also be having at 6 right after that. This is one of those free sessions you have to register for. There'll be a seed growers meetup, which will have Matthew will be there, and a couple of folks from OSA will be there. And yeah, God willing, and the Zoom gods loving me, I'll be there too. So it's all fun. Thanks for joining, everybody.
Thank you so much, everybody.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thanks.